This is an unofficial and unauthorized translation of a Figu publication. 200th Contact. Wednesday, May 1, 1985, 3:11 a.m. Billy says, "So, my son, you told me recently that in the coming time, genetic research would be widely discussed, but also a renewed debate would break out regarding the concept of the incarnation, as this was already the case in earlier centuries, I mean in terms of the incarnation, and thus, the moment is meant in which the fetus becomes animated in the womb through the spirit form that is capable of rebirth, which includes the entire consciousness block of the new personality that is created by the spirit in the fetus in which the spirit respectively enters." Quetzal says, "That is correct. I've explained a few things to you in relation to this. The large and worldwide debate around genetic research will already soon have its beginning, but it will first be in a lot of people's mouths at and around the turn of the millennium. Also, the question of the beginning of the incarnation will then be raised again in a strong form, and in this connection, all sorts of false suppositions and polished nonsense will dominate the agenda, especially through the pseudo-scientific and pseudo-religious false assertions and ideologies of the know-it-alls, fanatics, politicians, parish staff, theologians, and, of course, through the sectarians, false prophets, media, and alleged contactees, as well as through the Pope, whose predecessors, being absolute amateurs in the matter of the beginning of the incarnation, already felt eager for hundreds of years to spread their nonsense. Thus, Pope Pius X, among others, absurdly maintained and made the doctrine that Joseph's wife Mary, already from the moment of Emmanuel's conception, carried a reason-gifted soul in herself, and that already at conception, the fertilized egg was animated by the soul, and so, Emmanuel's personality and his reason had already existed. But the fact is that there is no soul because in truth, this is identical with the psyche, which could have allowed the fertilized egg to become filled with reason, but that in truth, it exclusively deals with a spirit form which is capable of rebirth, respectively the spirit. Nothing of this was mentioned at all. But this could not have been otherwise, since this Pope had no notion of the teaching of the spirit and of the actual creative laws. Therefore, the inventor of the dogma of Mary's Immaculate Conception made an absurd assertion out of self-praise and arrogance as well as out of unreal thinking, etc., namely with regard to the fact that he would be absolutely immoderate and incorrect in that with the celebration of the Immaculate Conception of Mary, something would be worshipped and celebrated that would be without reason, and with this, the fertilized egg was meant. That's what happened in the year 1854. Years later, in 1869, he then changed the canon law in order to give validity to his nonsensical assertion. Yet up to that time, it was such that the fetus was inanimate up to 80 days after the conception, and the value of animation was only granted to it starting from the 80th day. In addition to various other things, this 80th day was also important for abortion because after this time, one became punished with an excommunication. As a result of the absurd assertion of Pope Pius X, from then on, an excommunication inevitably took place with each abortion because the new rule was that through a sperm, the fertilized egg would already be animated in the body of the woman and, thus, would be filled with reason and would respectively be an indivisible individual, as this term was adopted from the Greek word that is transliterated as tomen. But this acceptance of the individual and of being filled with reason are actually absurd because, as you know, the animation of the fetus takes place via the spirit form on the 21st day after conception, with which also the heart begins its rhythmic activity, and thus begins the existence of the individual because at the same moment, when the rebirth, respectively the reincarnation, of the spirit form takes place in the fetus, the new personality, along with the entire consciousness block, becomes born into new life. Furthermore, It must be said that prior to this moment, up to around the 14th day after conception, which can vary, still different processes in the fertilized egg take place, as for example the division into twins. Asterisk translator's note. The original Greek word is atom, and also, transliteration occurs whenever all letters of a word from one language are simply converted into their corresponding characters of the other alphabet, into which the word is being transferred. So the above German word, Tomen, would be transliterated into the English language as Atomen. Billy says, you explained that just like a doctor. Quetzal says, like Patha, I've also learned this specialty. However, I've already explained this to you before. Billy says, unfortunately, I forgot. But now, so that no confusion arises, if I should still take in later conversation reports and write this down, maybe it would be useful for understanding, and such that once again, it is explained that the term individual is actually a transliteration of the Greek word tomen, as you've already said, and that this indivisible can also mean single being. In addition, it is also important to say that the origin of the term individual is actually connected with the term atom. But today, the designation individual stands for the single person, to which also scholasticism has contributed. Quetzal says, that is correct. As a result of scholasticism, the meaning of individual found a specification for the human personality, and then, in the 16th century, it developed into the special person. In today's German language, but also in other earthly languages, the term individual finds its meaning as a single person, as you rightly said. Billy says, you are also a German expert. Quetzal says, all of us, who keep in touch with you, have learned the German language very extensively. Billy says, Svath also spoke this language very well, but also my dialect. Quetzal says, that is well known to me. Billy says, he also instructed me in a good form in the German language, and with him, I also learned to write and to read, which was a reason for my first teacher. He was named Carl Graf, to take me, in a special measure, under his wing. Quetzal says, that is also known to me, also that he was led to you by Svath's telepathic impulses, and that he spoke about you with his friend, Carl Gustav Jung, whom you later became acquainted with in Zurich, when you visited your handicapped sister Verena, in the Matilda Escher home, and you made yet another visit to the psychiatric hospital, Berkeley, where C.G. Jung was visiting. Explanation. Teacher Carl Graf, with whom the little Eduard Billy visited during the first 3 school years, was not only one of Eddie's great friends, but he also stood on friendly terms with priest Rudolf Emanuel Immermann and with the well-known psychologist and psychiatrist, Professor Carl Gustav Jung. Carl Graf had been enlightened by the little Eduard in reference to his contacts with the extraterrestrial Svath and, as proof, even once received the opportunity to be allowed to observe his aircraft, with Svath's permission, in Erachfelden Villach, when Eduard went to a contact. A contact with Svath was excluded, but the experience was enough for the teacher to promote, from then on, the scholastic progress of the boy entrusted to him, also partly in his spare time on a private basis. At the same time, it couldn't fail, of course, that Carl Graf was faced with many questions from Eduard, which he also answered, faithful to his knowledge and understanding. If he couldn't do this, however, especially when it came to strictly psychological and life-related matters, then he contacted his friend, Professor Carl Gustav Jung, to whom he had reported of Eduard, as well as of his sighting experience regarding Svath's aircraft.